the album War from U2. This comes out in 1983. Why does this album mean so much to you? This is early on in U2's career.
So I want to actually preface this by saying this is probably my favorite album of all time, or certainly the
Ooh.
album that means the most to me. And it is early in U2's career. And if you look at the stats on War and you think about the songs on it, particularly Sunday Bloody Sunday and New Year's Day, you think about them as being staples of classic rock radio. But that wasn't the case when this album came out. That is something that has happened since then. This album came out, it was I think it barely cracked the top 50 albums in America. It didn't crack as far as like the top 40 radio. It didn't make it onto top 40. None of the songs made it onto that. U2's first song that made it into top 40 was Pride in the Name of Love from the album after this,
Hmm.
which peaked at number 32.
So this
So
paved the way to that
it
success
paved the
afterwards.
way. It was more of a success at AOR radio and in certain markets in America, and it was a bigger success in the UK than it was in North America. But U2 were still flying pretty low as far as like public awareness goes. So 1983, I'm a kid in grade 11 at Napanee District Secondary School. The music that was kind of everywhere at the time would have been John Cougar, probably even before he was John Cougar Mellencamp,
Mr. Mellencamp.
Mr. Mellencamp, Madonna, Van Halen, Huey Lewis and the News,
Wow, this sounds nothing like those artists.
Michael Jackson. That was the stuff that was getting played on Kingston radio, which was the only radio I could pick up in Napanee. And my friend Graham McDonald, my dear friend, one of my oldest friends, who is currently the manager of Moist. We were friends way back then, and we were sitting in my mom's car, and he said, "You got to hear this." And he popped in the cassette of War, and the initial drums came in,
Sunday,
da da
Bloody
da da
Sunday.
da 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 da, and it was just so unlike anything I had ever heard. And up to that point, my favorite band probably then was Rush, which is, and U2 is like, they're just nothing at all like Rush. And I still love Rush. I've always loved Rush, but there was something so immediate. Everything about the vocal delivery, everything about the what he was saying, where Neil Peart's like lyrics are small novels kind of thing. What Bono was saying was like it was straight from the heart, and it was like political in a way that I'd never heard music be. And I was completely unaware of where U2 would have gotten their inspiration, like with bands like the Clash and that kind of thing. That was also not part of my Napanee experience. But from the moment I heard it, I was just hooked. And U2 from that point became like my obsession. I was just completely consumed with everything that they were and that they stood for. And this album still, it still is my favorite album of theirs, maybe my favorite album of all time. I can go through every note, every lyric of this album and defend it for why I think it's so great. Graham gave me his U2 War t-shirt, and I was wearing it around Napanee District Secondary School, and everyone was like, what was this? The letter U and the numeral 2, what does this mean? And I was trying to explain how wonderful it was. And fortunately, 4 years later, they were the biggest band in the world, and I didn't have to explain it anymore. But the album came out in maybe January of '83, and I think that it was played for me in about April of '83. And yeah, I was a diehard, lifelong fan ever since that moment.
So this is another short and sweet album. The Led Zeppelin album had 8 songs. This has 10 songs, I believe. So
Yep.
it's like all killer, no filler.
Yeah.
This is
LP length. I love LP length when they had to keep the sides to 22 minutes aside. Yeah.
and this is the band's third album, and you mentioned this has a harsher sound than the two previous albums, and that harshness together with the political content with the delivery, it all added to that. It felt so present, like
Yeah.
it,
It's
it
very
felt like
immediate.
like immediate is the word
Yeah.
I'm looking for.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that obviously when this record blew my socks off, I immediately went back and bought Boy in October, the albums before it, and loved them as well. But Boy's a great album too. It's definitely in my top 20 favorite albums of all time. October's more atmospheric, but lyrically on those albums, they're more. There's a lot of singing about their faith at the time, which I was completely down with all that as well. I thought that was great back then, but the lyrics were more obscure, obtuse a little bit. The lyrics on War and the drum sounds, the drums are not atmospheric sounding, particularly not on Sunday Boy to Sunday. They're right, they're just right there. They're right at your head. There's nothing apologetic or hiding about it. It's an assault, and we don't. That song Sunday Boy to Sunday has become such a well known. Such an anthem now. It's hard to remember how odd it sounded in 1983.
So you mentioned two of the singles already, New Year's Day and Sunday Bloody Sunday. There was two more singles, Two Hearts Beat as One and 40, the last song on the album.
Yeah.
Uh, Go ahead. Go ahead.
So Two Hearts Beat is One is another. Okay, actually, two things. I feel like this is a great album for, again, another bass player album. This is a great album for Adam Clayton. So many of the songs are are really driven by his bass parts, and later, certainly when we get into the Joshua Tree area stuff, he's playing a lot of just sort of basic quarter note, eighth note kind of support for what's going on rhythmically that the Edge is doing. That's not the case with War. He gets back, he gets to start doing fun stuff again when they get into the Acton Baby era. But like Two Hearts Beat is One is totally a bass driven song. New Year's Day is completely a bass driven song. Seconds is completely a bass driven song. You just mentioned it. 40 is completely a bass driven song, although apparently it's actually the Edge playing the bass on that song. But the bass parts are super important to the way these songs roll. And so it was very formative for me. I was just learning how to play bass at that time too. So I learned a lot of my bass playing lessons came from Adam Clayton and that album.
As I was listening, so I actually listened to this album on Sunday when I was driving to my parents for Thanksgiving. And I was going to mention that the bass just pops through and the sound of the bass, there's like a clarity to it and a warmth to it. And I was going to ask you if that influenced you as a bass player with Moist, because I hear that crisp, clean bass sound with Moist.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely. Although yeah, he's definitely certainly my favorite bass player until Adam Clayton came along was Geddy Lee. And
That's harder to play.
I could never aspire to be anything like Geddy Lee. So I had no desire to ever sound like him or be like him. But I mean, I remember being in stage band and, the teacher was waiting for everyone to play their parts. And I would just be playing the bass part too. Two Hearts Beat is One. The bang, bang, because it's just a fun bass part. And another thing about Two Hearts Beat is One is that I feel like it is the where like Sunday Boy to Sunday and Seconds and New Year's Day are very directly political songs. I feel like Two Hearts Beat is One is the closest that U2 ever got to to singing a very direct love song. It's just a love song. Two Hearts Beat is One. It's a really simple sentiment. I mean, they did other songs that could be interpreted as love songs later on. Like you could think the One for One, but we're not the same as a love song.
What was the love song like years later? He wrote it to his wife as like an apology. The music video is him
Yeah,
like driving in a car. So he's like in
sweetest
the
thing.
sweetest
Yeah,
thing. That's what
yeah,
I'm thinking of.
yeah. That's true. Actually, that's even
That's like years
more.
later.
Yeah, that's more of a. Yeah, actually, you know what? Point taken. That's definitely more of a direct love song. But
Right, but that's this is the
that's years
start.
later.
That's way
Yeah,
later. Yeah.
yeah. So Two Hearts Beat is One is I don't know. I don't know. It's very it's very direct. I wanted to mention that too because Two Hearts Beat is One is a song that's always I've been very fond of for sure. I hope you're not tempted to move on because I want
No,
to
I
talk
got
about.
so much to say about this album still.
Okay, well, I want to talk about Drowning Man because Drowning Man, I would include in a conversation about that being the best song that U2's ever recorded. It is if you listen to it intently at all, with sort of like you can see there's so much going on in that song. It's in a weird key signature. The bass comes in at a really weird spot compared to where everything's sitting. There's a incredible violin part that's going on. The lyrics amazing. The production's incredible. I would put and Drowning Man, I would put up there with Zooropa from the title track from their 1993 album Zooropa as the two finest songs that U2 ever recorded.
Wow, they have lots of great songs, so that's high praise.
Probably a controversial opinion again, but yeah,
I'll have to put another disclaimer
yeah.
across
Please do, please do.
that part. When you mentioned you had a U2 shirt you were wearing around school and kids were asking about it, it reminded me it's I don't know, years ago I heard that when U2 was choosing their band name, they just thought, what is the shortest band name we can come up with so we can have it as big as possible on a poster?
Yeah,
And U2, literally, it's like you can have the entire size of the poster with U2. Apparently, that's the only reason they went
yeah,
with U2. It's the shortest they could think of.
yeah. In fact, a friend of theirs who played in a band called the Radiators, a guy named Steven Averill, I think. There's another podcast that I'd love, which is all about the graphic design choices that were made for every U2 album. And he apparently is the guy who suggested that name to them, and he suggested it with that exact thing in mind. As a graphic designer, he thought this is going to look great on a poster, on a T-shirt. When you guys are on the bill with other bands, your name is going to be the biggest because it's going to take up, that much space. As far as the, I don't know, I'm not a graphic designer, but yeah, exactly that.
And you said this was kind of the start of U2 becoming one of the biggest bands in the world. So, it had kind of a slow start outside of the UK. It's their first album to finally go gold in the US. On its way to eventually, it sold 11 million copies. But you wonder how much is that going back since U2 became the biggest band, right? The whole discography
Absolutely.
ends up selling millions afterwards. So you
Yeah,
wonder at what point they sold 11 million
yeah,
copies.
no, it was a gold album. They sold 500,000 copies of it over the course of its initial release, which is a big success, but not a huge success. 500,000 records is not enough that you can, retire on or even buy a house with or whatever. It's enough your label's making money, but the band's not making any money at that point. So yeah, that 11 million definitely came after the fact for sure. The other thing about it for me is that I was so obsessed with the band that I started buying magazines anytime that there was a mention of U2 in a magazine, I would be buying it. So that got me buying magazines that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise, like UK publications and that kind of thing. And so it opened my world to a whole bunch of other bands from that that part of the world, bands that were like the part of the British post punk type thing, bands like Joy Division and Waterboys and Echo and the Bunnymen and that kind of stuff. So it was a huge kind of world opening moment for me.
And you were saying that they found success in the UK before here, and they actually knocked Michael Jackson's Thriller out of the number one spot in the UK,
In the
which is
UK,
wow.
they
The
did, yeah.
biggest, literally the best-selling album of all time. U2
Yeah.
knocked it out of number one.
Well, it was going to fall eventually. Had to get, I couldn't stay there forever. So
Yeah,
yeah,
we
I'm
don't know.
glad it was them.
Maybe it was in week like 61
It
that it
probably
finally
was. Yeah.
knocked it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's too funny. And I have something here about the naming of why the album's called War. I guess back in 1982, Bono said that it seems like war is the motif for this year. I guess there was wars breaking out everywhere around the world, and they decided to call the album War. There's the two singles, Sunday Bloody Sunday, New Year's Day. Both are political. They just felt like war seemed to be what was on everyone's mind back at the time that they were writing this album.
Wow. I never heard that, but yeah, I guess so. I was 15, so I was completely unaware of that, but yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you were just listening to music in
Uh,
Napanee and
yeah. I was
life
just
was
listening to
good.
music and trying to seeing this bigger world going on. So yeah.
You mentioned to me that you've actually seen U2 several times in concert.
Yeah. So the first time I saw them was the album that came out after that, the Unforgettable Fire tour, which came out in 1984. And they came to Ontario twice on that tour. They came in the December of 1984. They played Massey Hall in Toronto.
Wow, that would be so good, right? That's one of the best sounding venues in the world.
Oh, for sure. But I just couldn't figure out how to get there. It was Toronto was seemed like again at that point I was only 16, so it seemed like a long way to go. But then in the spring they came back and they played the Civic Center in Ottawa. Now the what do they call it now? The TD
TD
place.
plays, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a bus tour that was run from Queen's University So to go to the show. So
From Kingston to Ottawa?
from Kingston to Ottawa. Yeah. And so that was my I knew I could get there. I remember waking up after that show and thinking, okay, I can die now. Now I've seen
Yeah,
them
my life is all
live.
downhill from
Yeah.
here on out.
And years later, when I played that stage, I remember thinking, wow, I can't believe I'm actually playing the stage now where I that was so important to me all those years before. So yeah.
U2 was just warming up for Moist years
Yeah,
later.
exactly.
So then
Yeah.
you saw them a couple more times as
Yeah, I
well?
saw the Acton Baby tour at BC Place. I think it was BC, whatever the big, wherever the BC Lions play, big stadium there. That was great. That was the the famous tour with the little cars suspended above the stage and Bono making prank phone calls from the stage and that kind of thing.
Ordering
Um,
10,000 pizzas?
ordering 10,000 pizzas. We did that in Chicago or something. Is that right?
Yeah.
Uh, and then I saw them again at the Air Canada Center, Scotiabank Place, in I think on the tour.
Was it Elevation at that point or
No, it was
no?
the album after that, the one with
How to
um,
dismantle an
Uno,
atomic
dos,
bomb?
tres, yeah, Uno, dos, tres, catorces, yeah. How to
Hmm.
dismantle the atomic bomb, yeah. The Vertigo tour, I think it was called, yeah.
Hmm.
And that was great. I would see them again for sure. They're it's just tough to find time to get away, but yeah,
They're one of the few bands that are considered all-time great live bands that I haven't seen.
oh,
And
surprising,
and I hear that it's like a religious experience when you see them live because of the way Bono is. I guess it's almost like he commands attention. He's a presence. It's almost like a pastor at church that's like speaking the word almost. I don't know. I've never seen it, so I'm
yeah.
not explaining properly, but it sounds like you come back changed by this experience.
Yeah, no, he does a really good job of pulling the audience into the moment and making everyone who's there feel special. And part of that is I realized quite a while ago, but that U2 had they developed a very clever thing in their songwriting very early on, which is that almost every single song that they've released as a single has a part of it that can be sung along with no words. So in Pride, it's oh 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 oh. And With or Without You is oh oh. So there's a part that, and I swear I can't think of the other ones now, but there's a lot of songs that have that. So it gives the audience, whether or not they know the words or not, it gives them a moment where they can join in and sing along without having to worry about not knowing the words. And I think if you look at a U2 set list, you'll be surprised by how many of the songs have that feature in them. And even actually their very first song, the very first song they ever released, which is a song called 11 O'Clock TikTok, the version that they recorded is terrible, the one that came out in like 1979. But the version that's on the Live at Red Rocks album, which was the live album that they put out after the War album, has a great version of 11 O'Clock TikTok. And it's another one of my very favorite U2 songs. And even then, even though it was one of their very first songs, it has that moment of where the audience can sing along without knowing the words. And I think that's been a very critical part of their success in concert.
How amazing would it have been to see them at the Vegas Sphere? You know, they were the band to kick off what's now this worldwide phenomenon that
Yeah.
everyone's going to see. I'm a big UFC fan. They just became the first sporting event to do a live event there. I think it's the Eagles that are there right now. I think the Grateful Dead or Dead and Company just
Dead
did
and
a
Co.
stint
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So how cool would it have been with your experience seeing them three times, but then picturing what they could do with technology around them?
Yeah. Yeah. I heard a lot of reports from that show from people I know who went, and it sounds like it was everything that they hoped it would be. Like it was just a technological marvel. It's really weird. Like it's weird watching I don't know if you saw any clips of it on YouTube, but it's a very weird thing to look at because the stage is so not
So
like
minimalist.
so minimalist. Yeah. It doesn't look anything like a classic rock concert stage, but it's just a different thing. The whole thing is it's all about the experience, the 360 immersive experience of the not 360, but 180 anyway, immersive experience with these massive screens in front of you and stuff. So yeah, I thought about selling the house and going to one of those shows, but
Yeah, it's the UFC event. tickets were like $15,000 or something ridiculous. So yeah,
Right.
it was all a dream, when they announced it.
Right.
I have one more point, just showing the acclaim that it had. Rolling Stone listed it at 221st on their list of 500 greatest albums of all time. So my point is saying it's considered one of the greatest albums of all
Yeah,
time.
sure. Yeah, I believe it. It deserves it.